Good evening, everyone. My name is Naftali Cohen, and to my side, Sri John and Jen. During the semester, we mentored 6 Columbia University students, Romane, Hritik, Kassie, Amaury, Maxime, and V. It was a pleasure mentoring you guys, and we had a lot of fun, and you gave great presentation to our team a week ago.
Yeah, so just to give a quick intro on our AI, JP Morgan AI research team, we are around 40 people right now, but we're still recruiting and looking for get more people from diverse background. In here, you can find people from computer science, robotics, and cryptography, and I don't know, and even information and wireless networks, and a lot of different fields. And we're bringing perspectives from all these diverse fields all into finance and look for novel ways of solving traditional and challenging problems. And it's a lot of fun working here.
So this specific project focuses on using unsupervised learning for analyzing time series, in specific financial time series, to discover investment opportunities. So the question that we want to answer was, how can you find multi-scale phenomena in financial time series? And what that means is, some patterns crop up over a couple of years, whereas some patterns occur on the scale of few weeks. So now we let the team walk you through their pipeline of the multiple pre-processing and clustering techniques they used, as well as how they discover these multi-scale patterns. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to share our work with you. As part of our Capstone project in this fall semester, we worked on utilizing unsupervised machine learning on financial time series data for identifying potential trading opportunities. So now let me give you some context on our work first. What we worked on broadly comes under what's called technical analysis in the study of investments. It aims to evaluate investments and identify trading opportunities using just the price and volume data. The assumption is the information relevant to a stock's performance is immediately reflected within the stock price. Predictions under technical analysis then are made by identifying patterns that are empirically known to lead to predetermined outcomes called chart patterns, as you see in the figure on the right. The identification and interpretation of these patterns, however, are subjective and may lead to inconsistent inference and biased interpretation. Being data scientists, we would like to approach technical analysis in an objective and a data-driven way. The primary question we then aim to answer is this: can we identify meaningful patterns in stock data using unsupervised machine learning, given the multi-scale nature of the financial time series? What did I exactly mean by multi-scale? One way to look at that is this cup and handle chart pattern circled here. There's a bigger arc and then a scaled down version of the same arc following it. We can say that the same pattern occurs in 2 different time scales. The longer time scale would show the general behavior of a stock over the past few months, while a shorter time scale would reflect the current behavior or the most recent behavior. You can also think of multi-scale in terms of multiple harmonics that make up a sine wave. Let's now dive into our work with the introduction side. Max will now take over to talk about the workflow.
Thanks, Hritik. So how do we identify multi-scale patterns in data? We break the problem down into 3 sub-problems. Firstly, how can we gather data that has multi-scale patterns? We use real data from the S&P 500 over the past 20 years, and we also generate our own artificial data, which we use to check our algorithms. Secondly, how can we extract multi-scale features from this data? We explore a variety of different methods from financial engineering, physics, and machine learning. We cluster the features extracted from these methods using k-means and evaluate them with the appropriate metrics. And then, once we have the best methods, we combine them together to extract even better features. Finally, how can we make sure that our methods are capturing multi-scale patterns? We explore 2 ideas, which are pip permutation entropy and conditional distribution. Moving on to the next slide, how can we gather data that has multi-scale patterns? And the idea here was to generate it ourselves. We use an idea from signal processing called discrete cosine transform, which breaks down a signal into a sum of different patterns on different time scales. And we use this idea in reverse to generate multiple time scales in a signal. Now we will detail our pipelines.
Thanks, Maxime. So before we dive into some of the results that we got, we also want to introduce you to two important concepts that we applied while clustering our time series. The first one is DCT and Fourier transform. While there are common tools for data compression, we also utilize these techniques as a smooth out method to eliminate some noisy signals in the time series. In addition to exploring different preprocessing techniques, we also looked at dynamic time warping as a way to measure similarity between two time series. The reason why it can perform better than Euclidean distance is because it can capture the similarity of two time series, even when they are out of sync in terms of times and speed. Now, Romane will walk you through how we optimize our parameters.
Thank you, V. So to perform our clustering, we decided to use k-means, which is an algorithm that is often used on time series to detect existing patterns. So we thought that it fit particularly well the purpose of our research. However, it's an algorithm that needs to know how many clusters we want to obtain beforehand. This means that we need to optimize that number of clusters, and to do so, we used the silhouette score, which is a metric that accounts for the intra and inter-cluster distance, and the elbow method. Now we will see how we actually apply this on our data, and Kassie is going to take the lead on that.
Thank you, Romane. In this presentation, I will discuss only two of our pipelines for the sake of time. The first one is DCT and skipped values. And as you can see on the figure of the left, we have the scale time series, which will pass through a DCT filter. Next, we will append two context scales to the signal. The first will skip the price every other day, and the second will skip the price every 2 days. Each of these dimensions gives us a more general scale of the price. Next, we will look at our clustering. So this is our clustering pipeline. Since our data points are still on the time domain, we're going to use k-means with dynamic time warping as our distance metric. On the right is an example of what the clusters look like. The yellow line is the cluster center, and the blue lines are the time series. Amaury will be next presenting the autoencoders pipeline.
Thanks, Kassie. So quickly, autoencoders are neural networks trained to learn the input by reducing the inner dimension. Here we use them to extract features of the long-term scale time series. If we look to the pipeline, we first move the signal using DCT. Then we train and extract features using the autoencoders. And if we go to the next slide, we combine the extracted features with the information from the shorter term to perform clustering. On the right, you can see two examples of clusters, which are quite harmonic. Nonetheless, the main takeaway here is that even if you try complex or deeper architectures with CNN or LSTM, it will give you the same result as a single layer. That's all for this pipeline, and we will talk now about multiscale evaluation.
So we need a tool to help us capture the long-term trend and short-term patterns of a time series. We use PIP as a method for dimensionality reduction, and it will extract the most important points from a human observer perspective. Here you can see the green line is a time series with 60 data points, and the red line is the representation of that time series with only 20 data points. And we can see that all of the important features of the original time series are still there, even when we use only less than half of the data points to represent the time series. And we're going to use PIP combined with a concept called permutation entropy to evaluate the multi-scale patterns of our cluster. Amaury, please go ahead.
Sure. Permutation entropy is a method to measure time series complexity by classifying motifs inside a signal using a sliding window. As we have many data points, we use PIP to extract the most important ones to study the motifs. If we are looking into the plot on the left, we have an increasing pattern. And here we have a second increasing pattern, the same as the former one. And finally, here we have a decreasing pattern. And by doing it for each time series, we can build the histogram below. We then can better understand how are composed our clusters. And Kassie will present a bit more about how we applied it on our clusters.
Thank you, Amaury. Now that we have the tools for multiscale evaluation, we can take a look at the skipped values clustering. By looking at cluster 0 and cluster 4 in the left figure, we can quickly see that they capture a similar long-scale pattern. And in order to verify this observation, for each cluster, we find the 3 bit-point transformation of all the time series and then create histograms of the motifs that appear. As we can see for both clusters, the most frequent motif is the up and down pattern, and thus these two clusters have a very similar long-scale pattern. But what about the short scale? So in order to see what's happening on the short scale, we transform all the time series in each cluster into 5 pip points, and then use a sliding window of length 3 to see what's the highest frequency count in each sliding window. As we can see in window 1 of cluster 0, the most frequent pattern is increasing, whereas in cluster 4, it's decreasing and then increasing, and so on. Thus, even though these clusters are the same in the long scale, they are different in the short scale. Moving on to conditional probabilities, Hritik will present our work.
Next, in multiscale evaluation, we want to investigate the predictive power of our clustering models and really how short-term trends relate to the long-term trends from the past. So how we go about that is we take a 60-day chunk that we call a long time series and the last 20 days of that chunk to be a short time series. And by the way, this split could be varied to capture the multiscale phenomena that we discussed. Then we cluster these two sets of time series independently, and we look at the probability distributions of the assigned future clusters to the time series in any of a given past time series cluster. What I said can be better depicted by this figure here. On the left, you have one of those long time series clusters which shows an increasing trend. The short time series that belong to this cluster could go into one of the 7 different clusters with different probabilities shown in the middle of the figure. You see that cluster 0, which also shows an increasing trend in the short term, has the highest probability in this conditional probability histogram on the right, while cluster 7, which shows a decreasing trend, has the lowest probability. I hope this is intuitive looking at the figure. And so we then perform this conditional distribution analysis using clustering results from different pipelines for the purpose of evaluating them. The conditional distribution illustrated here come from the autoencoders pipeline. And what we really want in these histograms to see is that they should be non-uniform and peaky, with most of the time series likely to go into a few clusters, because that would really indicate that the clustering results had some predictive power. And to quantitatively pursue this idea, we use Shannon entropy and normalize it for a fair comparison across different pipelines that could have different number of clusters. Shown in this table are two results from 2 different pipelines. One is vanilla k-means that we use as a baseline and the autoencoders pipeline. And as we expected, autoencoders clusters in general have a smaller entropy, which means they have more predictive power. Romane will now wrap up this presentation with some key takeaways and directions for the future.
Thanks, Hritik. So to summarize our research, we explored new directions for multiscale analysis and evaluation in financial time series. We also realized that assembling different methods led to better results than applying clustering on those methods separately. However, we realized that our results varied across our preprocessing methods and among their clusters. This is why we are suggesting as a next step to fine-tune the existing pipelines that we created and that show potential to make sure that all of our clusters capture multiscale properties. We are also suggesting to introduce profitability to predict future stock behavior. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you to our mentors for all of their help.